The excitement is building up as we get closer to witnessing the first ever orbital flight test of a Starship launch vehicle. SpaceX conducted a Super Heavy Booster-7 spin prime test on Friday, February 17. Propellant loading into the liquid oxygen tank of Booster-7 began at around 1 p.m. on Friday afternoon. After partially filling the oxygen tank, SpaceX performed a single-engine spin prime test to make sure the engine turbopumps and associated components are functioning as expected. According to Elon Musk, during the 33-engine static fire test that took place on February 9, teams turned off one engine just before the ignition and another stopped itself during the test. The engine tested on February 17 could be one of those engines. SpaceX may conduct a static fire test involving the engines that failed on February 9 in the coming days to ensure they are performing as expected. SpaceX had removed a hydraulic power unit from Booster-7 prior to the January 23 full-stack wet dress rehearsal. The hydraulic power unit is designed to supply pressurized oil to the booster's hydraulic actuation system. On February 14, teams installed a new hydraulic power unit to replace the removed one. However, hours later, another hydraulic power unit was removed from the booster and has yet to be replaced. Teams are also preparing the orbital launch mount for the historic test flight. The launch mount legs and deck are currently being covered with protective shields. The shields protect all exposed piping, manifolds, control panels, and other components from engine exhaust and debris. You can see how the orbital launch mount will look with all the shields installed in this animation created by Ryan Hansen Space. Work is also underway to install a water deluge system at Starbase. Teams are removing the concrete below the launch pad ahead of trenching to install the deluge system pipes. The pipes will run through the site of the launch tower to a large water tank expected to be built in the coming days. Please check out my previous updates to learn more about the Starship water deluge system. Links are in the description. Starship's orbital flight test just got a tentative launch date, courtesy of a NASA calendar. The NASA Airborne Science Program calendar marks March 11 as SpaceX Starship launch, providing a tentative launch date for the rocket and highlighting the project's arbitrary nature. The latest Booster-7 31-engine static fire came a day after SpaceX President Gwynne Shotwell announced that SpaceX would make an orbital flight attempt in March. Shotwell's timeframe was then repeated by Musk, making it almost clear that the first flight test would take place next month. However, a lot of work must be completed before that ambitious test flight, including installing the water deluge system. SpaceX also requires an FAA launch license, which the agency will only issue once SpaceX address all the issues raised in the FAA environmental review. SpaceX rolled Starship 26 to the launch site last week to begin pre-launch tests after completing assembly work at the build site. Ship 26 is currently sitting on top of suborbital launch pad A, which SpaceX modified for cryogenic-proof testing. Ship 26 features three main design changes compared to previous Starship prototypes. The vehicle lacks forward and aft flaps, has no thermal protection system tiles installed, and is missing a payload bay. From these design changes, it is evident that Ship 26 is not intended to return to Earth, nor is it capable of deploying satellites into orbit. There are a few theories as to why SpaceX built such an odd-looking Starship. According to NASA, SpaceX is working on 4 types of Starship variants. The crew and tanker ships that will feature heat shields and flaps. The white and insulated Starship moon lander that lacks flaps and heat shields. And the depot ship with stretched tanks that will stay in orbit permanently and store propellant for in-space refilling. Based on various renders, Ship 26 looks very similar to the Starship Depot variant. A Depot Starship would be launched into Earth orbit and loaded with fuel by Starship tanker flights. A lunar Starship vehicle would then launch and rendezvous with the already loaded propellant depot and refill before transiting from Earth orbit to lunar orbit. However, Ship 26 currently lacks any of the hardware required for docking or propellant transfer, as well as stretched propellant tanks. Moreover, to survive in orbit for days or weeks, it would need a power source like solar arrays, which isn't also present. With no heat shield and flaps, Ship 27 is very similar to its predecessor, Ship 26. However, Ship 27 features a payload bay and could be used to deploy Starlink satellites into orbit during its mission. In October 2022, Mark Kiricich, former Deputy Associate Administrator for Artemis Campaign Development, revealed that SpaceX's second Starship test flight would be a Starship-to-Starship propellant transfer demonstration mission. So, it's possible that Ships 26 and 27 are meant to demonstrate Starship on-orbit docking and propellant transfer technology, but both ships currently lack the hardware required for that mission. Apart from the 3 main design changes explained earlier, Ship 26 also features some minor design changes. Let's go through a series of tweets posted by the Ring watchers to learn what those design changes are. In contrast to previous prototypes, Ship 26 features internal stringers in the liquid oxygen tank that should prevent tank denting when depressurized. Previous prototypes had 3 vents for depressurizing the oxygen tanks, but Ship 26 only has 1. The longer external stringers in the Ship 26's aft dome increased the structure's overall strength. The design of the flight termination system and the liquid oxygen header tank downcomer were also slightly altered in Ship 26. Ship 26 may also be the first to implement the Raptor engine electric thrust vector control system. The only way to confirm this is to look at the actuators on Ship 26's engines when the prototype rolls out to the launch site for static fire tests after engine installation. In addition to the changes mentioned, Ship 26 may have several design improvements hidden from the public eye. SpaceX President Gwynne Shotwell says that the company has temporarily abandoned efforts to transform 2 oil rigs into Starship launch platforms to focus entirely on gaining flight experience with the next-generation rocket. In 2020, SpaceX acquired 2 oil rigs, which it subsequently named Phobos and Deimos after the 2 moons of Mars. The company intended to transform the rigs into offshore launch platforms that would be used to launch Starship vehicles. The rigs were transported to the port of Pascagoula last year for conversion work, but little of that work has been completed since then. Recent shipping manifests published by the port show that both rigs are set to leave the port in the coming weeks. According to Shotwell, SpaceX had sold the rigs after concluding they were not suitable for use as a launch platform. At Starbase, last Tuesday afternoon, teams moved Starship 27's nosecone payload bay assembly into the high bay. Hours later, it was stacked atop the forward dome section. Ship 27's basic structure will be complete with one more stacking operation. Raptor engine tests continue at SpaceX's McGregor rocket development and test facility. A 195-second-long Raptor test was conducted on a tripod stand lately, which according to NASA spaceflight, is a new test record. Now, let's discuss some of the biggest updates in the world of science and technology from the past week. A Russian Progress supply ship successfully docked with the International Space Station on February 11, but another Progress docked at a different port suffered a sudden loss of coolant. Roscosmos launched its latest ISS resupply ship, Progress MS-22, from Baikonur Cosmodrome in Kazakhstan on February 9 aboard a Soyuz rocket. The spacecraft carried more than 2,500 kilograms of cargo, fuel, water, and air to the space station. Around 2 days after the launch, the spacecraft automatically docked with the aft docking port on the Zvezda module. Shortly after, Roscosmos engineers detected a depressurization in the coolant loop of the Progress MS-21 cargo spacecraft, which has been docked at the station since October 2022. It was not immediately clear whether the spacecraft suffered a malfunction or if it was hit by space debris or a micrometeoroid. NASA later confirmed that the crew of the ISS is in no danger and that the cause of the leak is under investigation. This incident occurred nearly 2 months after the Soyuz MS-22 spacecraft docked at the station suffered a similar coolant leak due to a micrometeoroid impact. Progress MS-21, scheduled to undock from the orbiting laboratory on February 18, is now loaded with trash and no longer needed equipment. Once undocked from the ISS, the spacecraft will be allowed to burn in the Earth's atmosphere after deorbiting. Details on whether the spacecraft will undock from the space station on February 18 or whether it will remain attached to the station for a few more days to give engineers time to investigate the coolant leak were unavailable at the time this video was made. Meanwhile, Soyuz MS-22, which ferried U.S. astronaut Frank Rubio and cosmonauts Sergei Prokopyev and Dmitry Petel into the station, has been deemed unfit to bring astronauts back to Earth, except in an emergency. Last week, the Russian Space Agency released the first public image of the external damage that caused the radiator leak aboard Soyuz MS-22. This image was captured by the Canadarm2 robotic arm on the U.S. segment of the station. An unpiloted Soyuz spacecraft was planned to launch on February 19 to replace the damaged ship. However, Roscosmos announced lately that the launch will be delayed until early March due to the Progress MS-21 anomaly. The Federal Aviation Administration proposed a $175,000 civil penalty against SpaceX on February 17 for failing to provide the agency with some safety data before a Falcon 9 launch. The launch in question was a Starlink mission that took off from Cape Canaveral Space Force Station on 19 August last year. According to the FAA, SpaceX was required to submit the information known as Launch Collision Analysis Trajectory data at least 7 days before a planned flight. The data is used to assess the probability of the launch vehicle colliding with one of the thousands of tracked objects orbiting the Earth. SpaceX now has 30 days to respond to the notice, which is the next step in the process once a proposed fine has been issued and the maximum penalty has been determined. A dislodged fuel filter probably wrecked Virgin Orbit's historic launch from the United Kingdom in January. The company's Boeing 747 carrier plane, known as Cosmic Girl, lifted off from Spaceport Cornwall on January 9, carrying the 21 meters long LauncherOne rocket underneath its wing. The mission, dubbed Start Me Up, was the first international launch for LauncherOne, which had satellites from 7 customers, including commercial and government payloads from several nations. The aircraft flew to its designated drop location over the Atlantic Ocean, off the southern coast of Ireland, as planned, and released the LauncherOne rocket. The rocket then ignited its first stage Newton 3 engine and ascended into space. According to preliminary data analyses, the first stage performed as expected, and stage separation, upper stage ignition, and fairing separation also went according to plan. Later in the mission, at an altitude of almost 180 kilometers, the upper stage experienced an anomaly, ending the burn of its Newton 4 engine. This event ended the mission, with the rocket components and payload falling back to Earth without entering orbit. After a month-long investigation, engineers discovered that a fuel filter in the rocket's second stage had been dislodged from its normal position when the second stage engine ignition started. As a result, the fuel pump downstream of the filter operated at a degraded efficiency level, resulting in the second stage engine being starved for fuel and operating at a significantly higher than rated engine temperature. Engine components eventually malfunctioned, causing the second stage thrust to terminate prematurely. Virgin Orbit said it is going through a detailed action plan to determine the root cause of the failure and is taking steps to prevent a filter issue from occurring on upcoming flights. According to Virgin Orbit CEO Dan Hart, the company is modifying their next rocket with a more robust filter, and they are looking broadly to assure that all credible contributors to mission failure are rooted out and addressed. Virgin Orbit will announce more information about the next LauncherOne mission in the coming weeks, which will lift off from Mojave Air and Spaceport in California. Thank you for tuning in for the latest science news and Starship updates. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button, leave a comment, and share it with your friends. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss an episode.